Hello, and welcome to Incorporating Existing Resources into the MLE Context. This is the first of four webinars about supporting multilingual learners of English, a professional learning seminar that's hosted by WestEd in collaboration with the Texas Success Center, SESI, and Student Ready Strategies. This webinar is supported by a grant from Ascension. First of all, welcome. My name is Emily Suh. I currently am an associate professor at Texas State University, but I began my career with nearly 10 years' experience in the community college system, where I taught English as a second language to adults as well as developmental education courses. We want to begin by thanking you for attending this session with us, and also to begin by saying thank you to our grant partners, both Ascensium and the Texas Success Center. In this module today, we're going to be looking at the ways that we can braid research and practice in order to think about how we can support our multilingual students' experiences, drawing from their own cultural knowledge, as well as the institutional resources that are available to them. Our presenters today are Dr. Aaron Doran and Dr. Darren Jensen. Dr. Doran is an associate professor of educational leadership and foundations at the University of Texas El Paso, where she is also a research associate in the Diana Natalicio Institute for Hispanic Student Success. However, Dr. Doran also began her career teaching in the two-year college. Dr. Darren Jensen is Associate Dean of English and Director of Writing across the college at Salt Lake Community College, where he also has been an English professor. In the past, Dr. Jensen worked in multiple community college contexts, including in adult English as a second language. Dr. Jensen currently serves as the editor of Teaching English in the two-year college. And so I want to take a moment to explain that I'll be engaging with our presenters as they go through the material today in order to help you think about your relationship to the material and what it means to you in your context as a practitioner. Although I'm no longer in the classroom directly in this capacity, I certainly maintain deep ties to the types of practitioners who we hope will be engaging with this video today. This module contains three different sections. After our presenters discuss or introduce a topic, we will pause and invite you to reflect upon a provided question, whether you're thinking about the answer on your own and its relationship to your practice, or whether you're pausing the video with your colleagues in order to have a discussion. After you finish that discussion, you can unpause the video and continue on to the next part of the module.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you and to learn from you. As Dr. Sum mentioned, both Dr. Jensen and I have extensive experience as both scholars and practitioners within the two-year college. And with that, part of the topics that we will be talking about today include literacy strategies to build institutional literacies, as well as to build personal literacies, how to braid literacy strategies with evidence-based research, and then envisioning praxis, or that is the connections between research and practice for student success. So to start with that first, we wanted to talk about how to frame support and pedagogy for multilingual learners. First and foremost, we see this as an opportunity to validate the work that you are already doing as scholar practitioners in the community college sector. We know that working with English language learners, translingual students, emergent bilinguals is work that is incredibly important to the community college mission, and that there is already really great work that is being done at your respective institutions. And so we hope that this can be validating for you, as well as to maybe give you some new ideas to help either refresh your teaching or maybe giving you some gumption to try something you haven't tried before. We also want to acknowledge that English language instruction is not one bucket of labor. And really what we mean by that is that we know that instructors are often at the nexus of English language instruction, writing instruction, as well as reading instruction and student success. And so all of these require different expertises, different strategies for learning types, et cetera, and for understanding the diversity of the student population that you serve. We also realize that traditionally English language instruction has been separated out from integrated reading and writing, and other types of developmental education, and we tend to see those as very interconnected teaching strategies, classes, and things like that, especially in community colleges in Texas that are serving a diverse student population, and students with different needs, different backgrounds, different linguistic assets. This segues straight into first year composition, which is where we ultimately hope that students will land and be successful so that they can make it to transfer level coursework and to be able to achieve whatever goals they have set for themselves. And with that, Darren, I'll hand it over to you.
So, the work that we're talking about, especially because Aaron is correct in noting that it isn't just one kind of work, and there aren't really neat disciplinary or theoretical boundaries or practice boundaries for what we're doing. And so, a lot of what we've been working on is thinking about a transdisciplinary orientation that serves student needs. And by transdisciplinary, we mean that it goes across disciplines. So I've been teaching in community colleges since 2003. I was a high school teacher before that. And we know that if we're serving students, we're thinking about reading pedagogy, we're thinking about writing pedagogy, we're thinking about student success strategies, we're thinking about what students need in terms of advising, we're thinking about their material needs and their physical needs as well. It isn't one thing that we do to be successful with students, just like it isn't just research or just teaching, right? It's always a combination of both. And that means that the work of open access institutions for literacy needs is expansive, and it's even more expansive than ever before. And I'm certain that we all know that students are different after COVID. We know that students, because of the numerous and longstanding K-12 reforms, are getting different kinds of instruction, and that we always have differently prepared students. And so it isn't academic or student services. It's both and. And like you, I imagine I am often teaching a lesson and then taking a student to the counseling center or walking them to show them where the food pantry is. It's both and, it's never one.
One of the places that we try to start from is in understanding that a key first step for equitable teaching is in understanding who you are, what privileges you may hold, and how those may interact with the students that you serve. Part of what we will encourage you to do today is thinking about the ways that you can incorporate your own journey into your teaching, including the stories of how you may have struggled as one way to make connections with students and to demonstrate empathy with them. As a former community college instructor, I remember working with students, and they typically were seeing the successes. They were seeing me in front of the classroom and thinking that obviously I was successful if I was standing in front of the classroom teaching them. And normally it could be a great way to build relationships with them to say, "Hey, I'm not good at math and I struggled in math when I was in college," or "I struggled with balancing working full time as well as going to school," or things like that to hopefully demonstrate that empathy, for my students to realize that I had been there or had shared some commonalities in terms of my own student experience with them. And that I could understand that my class was not the only thing that was going on in their lives. And I think that that tended to be something that students appreciated about our classroom experience, our shared learning experience. And yeah, just gave me a certain perspective and humility in terms of how I approach my students. And something that, in terms of thinking about privilege, about our own identities, and then how that relates to our students, different research bases such as asset-based pedagogies, like culturally relevant pedagogies. This was put forward by Gloria Lanson Billings. excuse me, she has, 2 iterations of this work, from 1995, and then an updated, culturally relevant pedagogy article that came out in 2014, advocates for understanding that students come to our classroom and they are shaped by a broader system of inequality within our society that can look very different according to who they are and what identities they hold. um, those previous experiences can shape their own educational journeys and sort of what has brought them to our classroom. And then we need to be able to find ways that we can foster moments of success with our students. Oftentimes, students arrive at a community college and their K-12 experience or other previous educational experiences weren't positive for them, but they still persisted. They still came ready to learn and ready to achieve whatever goals they have set forth for them. So, in what ways do we tap into students' assets, their determination, their aspirations, their hopes, their dreams, and all that? How do we leverage those in the classroom so that they can build confidence and so they can feel like they are capable of achieving whatever they have put forward for themselves?
So, we invite you to take a moment now to pause the recording and to reflect, either individually as a practitioner on your own or in community with your colleagues. First, what do you know about your students? What has surprised you about the linguistic diversity of your students? Second, has your institution provided you with disaggregated data to understand where they're coming from? This relates to Ben Simone et al.'s work in 2019. Additionally, what linguistic strengths do your students bring to the classroom? And finally, how do you create moments in the classroom for students to see their heritage language as an asset while they are strengthening their English skills? Now, of course, if you're in discussion with your colleagues, these questions are only meant to be a starting point to engage in deeper reflection. When you're ready, after the discussion, you can continue on with the video to finish up the webinar.
So now that you've come back from your discussion, we want to think about how we validate and support our students. And I'm sure that all of you know this, but effective teachers hold high standards while providing students with high levels of support for understanding content and helping them navigate the college environment. And what we mean is that, well, it's the old saying, the soft bigotry of low expectations. And when we provide high expectations with scaffolding and excellent support, students often exceed even their own expectations, or they're surprised by that, and they exceed our expectations too. And this is all supported by research. Importance of students feeling support from faculty, uh, by both Acevedo Gil and Duren Hingestag. I'm so bad at that, sorry. And there's also more information on embedded support by Nyo and Lee from 2021. And even more from importance of building navigational capital about how students move through these systems from Yoso in 2005. And course content students can connect to their own lived experiences and identities from Rose and Celie Ruiz. So again, highly contextualized, and this is something that comes directly from culturally relevant pedagogy, scaffolded instruction, making sure that everything is clear and that we go step by step, that we provide them with high expectations. We could talk about rigor, but we're also not talking about a deficit model. We really want to make sure that students are supported to reach literacy goals that they haven't had before. And one of the ways that we do that is we contextualize assignments. We connect the course content to students' lives, both their institutional lives as they fit in with their educational institutions and with their own lived experience to help them make their connections and find their voice. By making those connections real, students are often able to be far more successful in their writing and literacy assignments. All right, let's talk just a little bit about what I mean by scaffolded instruction. And Scaffolded instruction, as I've been a writing teacher since 1998, and so I think of old school process writing instruction, right? Peter Elbow, Donald Murray, all the rest, but you give students feedback while working on their projects. But more important than that, you provide them extra you don't make assumptions about what they know and what they don't know, and so you start to provide extra information, and you provide them extra feedback, and then you build step by step to a larger project over time. And one of the things that we do in our comprehensive literacy program at Salt Lake Community College is we in Composition 1, Composition 2, and in the 0990, which is our developmental writing that's paired with a studio writing course, we have students submit multiple drafts before. So it's formative rather than summative. They're not turning in something once and getting a grade. They're allowed to turn in something, they get feedback, they're allowed to build on it. We build in peer review process as well as instructor consultation process, and the students build that over time to achieve something that's more like a final product. And of course, we're not really looking for a final product in 15 weeks, and we have to explain that to students that real writing projects often take much longer. And this really gets them to understand writing as a process rather than a product. So, I wanted to talk about just a couple of assignments that work in this context, and I'm drawing again from the Salt Lake Community College Comprehensive Literacy curriculum. And so, one of the things that we use is an institutional literacy narrative, and there will be an example of this in your discussion guide. But what we do is we have the students research institutional literacies and practices. So, what is the registrar's office? What is financial aid? And because those are all important places and sites that students often don't know anything about. What does it mean to be in a club? What does it mean to be an athlete at a community college? What does it mean to rent a book versus buy a book versus, on and on and on. And all of these kinds of things become sites of inquiry, and these students are building literacy, building knowledge about this, and then they're sharing it out, and then the classroom becomes a kind of community that shares this knowledge. So students are building literacy practices, yes, with learning writing as a process, yes, but they're also learning the institutional norms and literacies that we expect them to have, but which are often invisible. We call that the invisible curriculum, which are often invisible to students, and some of the reason why students don't persist or complete. So we also begin to talk about educational identity and purpose, and I do this a lot in in the prison education program that I teach in, and in our first year composition classes as well, and in developmental writing too. So, what does it mean to be a student? What is your purpose here? What do you want to study? What is the purpose of education? And we start to build those as literacy, so they become literate about education, and they get readings with education, and they start to write about that. So again, they're building their own sense of identity and purpose as a student. They're learning to work within the norms of the educational system and the institution that we have, while simultaneously practicing the kinds of skills that we need them to have to be successful and transfer onto other classes and out into the workforce or onto a four-year institution. So, we will have a lot of examples of texts, in the discussion guide, but the text that you choose as an instructor must somehow engage with the students' lives. And we know that literacy has changed, and we know that students are often more reluctant readers than they were in the past. But if you find the right hook, a text that's a hook, you can often do these kinds of things. Just for example, I will just say, and this will be in the discussion guide, in my prison education program, I use the absolutely true diary of a part-time Indian. Now, we know Sherman Alexie is a troubled figure, but that book grabs my students in the prison education program in ways that other books don't. I used to use this in my with my high school dropouts too, as we were reintegrating them into the education system. And they'll read that, and they find themselves in that, and they understand that, and we're able to use that text to build educational identity and purpose and to have those kinds of rich conversations that we normally wouldn't have.
And something that I would add here is that all of these examples and even the discussion and guide examples that we provide are all backed by research in terms of the institutional literacy narrative offers students the opportunity to build what Tara Yoso would call their navigational capital. And it also helps to build their social capital in terms of students are sharing that information with one another. They're learning from each other. They're building that community while also learning to navigate the institution. The example of building their educational identity and purpose may tap into what Yoso calls the aspirational capital, and as well as the navigational capital in terms of being able to identify where it is that they want to ultimately end up, how education will help to facilitate that, and what they need to do to get there, and instilling a sense of purpose, and understanding what education will do in order to help students achieve whatever it is that they have set out for themselves. Some of the accompanying text that we offer as examples that can be used in this may be short stories, they may be autobiographical essays, as well as fictional works. So we hope that it gives folks different ideas of different kinds of texts that can be leveraged in the classroom to expose students to all the different kinds of reading that they can do, and in understanding that this generation of students now are doing a lot of different kinds of reading that may not be just a book in the same way. And so as we go on and offer some more examples, we hope that that can also give rise to what we call this expansive look at literature and this expansive look at research and practice and how this all comes to bear in the classroom. That there's a lot of room for creativity with students, and it's all backed by research that says that this is positive for students.
So, we again invite you to pause the recording and to reflect, thinking about what this would actually look like as a practice in your classroom. Sample questions that you could pose to your students include things like, what does education mean to your culture or within your own family? Or, what do you think a college education is? And what is its purpose? As you think about questions that you could ask your own students, consider what you know about your students. What kinds of responses would you expect from them? And how could you use this knowledge to build community and to leverage institutional resources? So, again, consider the list of sources that are available to you in the discussion guide and what the authors have said about education and or their lived experiences, and consider what your students might say in response to you as they engage with these texts and reflect upon them. When you're done with your reflection, whether it's in discussion with your colleagues or individually on your own, you can unpause the video and continue on with the rest of the module.
To try to take the examples that Darren has already talked about and to maybe assign some learning outcomes to them or to see what this actually looks like in practice, we want to dive a little bit deeper in that. And so, in terms of how we analyze student literacy practices and how we get students to think about their own literacies, we suggest things like having students critically read artifacts that they are familiar with, to identify and describe the purposes of the artifacts in your literacy field, and to identify and describe the audiences of the artifacts in your literacy area. One example that we have that does have a research article and an anecdotal piece attached to it is from Susan Naomi Bernstein's piece. That is, the full citation is in the discussion guide. It is something that was published in 2004. But Bernstein was a community college instructor in the Houston area who was having students read about educational inequalities. Specifically, she was reading, her students and her were reading Jonathan Kozol's Savage Inequalities, which is an older text, but a classic text at that, and one that still very much holds up to today. And students were maybe not understanding the research based or the language of inequity, but in reading the stories, they could think about the stories that they were reading in Kozel, think about and reflect on their own educational experiences, and start putting together those pieces of having the language to understand what happened to them, what inequalities they may have experienced, or on the flip side, what privileges they may have experienced, and to come at a place of reflection that was rooted in their own lived experience and in their past experience, to think about education, its purpose, the way that different folks experience the education system in different ways and whatnot. And this piece by Bernstein ends up being incredibly powerful at looking at this sort of meta-analysis that students are able to do on their own experiences, and what that is meant in hindsight and what that might mean moving forward for them. And in regard to this scaffolding and in being able to take this and move this idea into different types of assignments, different types of assessments, from moving from a place of reflection toward a more academic essay, we suggest a sort of assignment that says, for this project, you will submit a reflective literacy analysis. You can choose between three options for the format of your analysis. The first is an analytical essay that includes personal experiences. The second, a narrative with reflective analysis, or an instruction guide with reflective analysis. And we see these different ways that there might be differences between them. We're still asking students to write both something that is analytical in nature as well as reflective, hopefully, one that we are showing a little bit more. Critical thinking or sophistication into their writing. They're receiving feedback along the way to help them refine and to see that writing as a process, not just a product. And, in this particular, article that is referenced on the right side of the screen, and the full citation is in the discussion guide, we see that writing from a place of reflection and of lived experience can give students examples that they can draw from, that they can make reflections, or make connections to, and reflection can be a powerful tool that students can use in developing their own writing skills.
So we just wanted to talk a little bit more about this kind of braiding research and practice. So again, as Aaron and I came into this project, we were, we were positioned as a researcher and a practitioner, but we both really found that we were both and. And so we also think about that for our students too. So as we build institutional literacies, we want to become familiar with institutional literacies that college students need for success. Many of those things seem everyday for us. They seem par for the course for us, but they are things that are new and deserve exploration for our students. We need to apply critical reading and rhetorical analysis to understand unfamiliar texts and situations. And that can include many different things within our institutions. And I can't emphasize enough, we have to understand relationships between power and rhetorical choices. And students, once that's explained to them, they will find this an incredibly useful kind of frame for them to begin to understand that not just school, but many other experiences and institutions with which they deal. We also learn to summarize and present complex information effectively to a learning audience. And the students adapt their writing choices to different audiences and different genres, right? They understand that when they're writing a letter to the president of the college, that we're using different language than we are when we're writing a letter to someone else, when we're writing or when we're speaking with grandma, right? There are different registers that we use. So, and this is really to continue on this. Again, these are great practices, but they are also firmly supported by research. We can see here writing instructors must take an expansive view on reading to incorporate into reading and writing assignments. So again, what we're doing with how literacy is transformed, we're finding that our writing that our writing classes are now transdisciplinary and translingual spaces. So, obviously, various pedagogical approaches like multiliteracies, teaching about code switching. I just mentioned linguistic registers, right? Can help students adapt to their institutional environment, not and their work environment and personal environments, right? And they understand how communication may change across audience types, right? They're becoming flexible with genre, flexible with register, flexible with those situations. These are things that are transferable skills beyond our writing classroom. And just a little bit more, we always again, I wanna come back to this transdisciplinary frame. We aren't just writing teachers. What we do doesn't begin and end in a writing classroom and 5 office hours a week or whatever it is that's contracted at your institution. We know that student success begins and ends with holistic wraparound support that can provide students with the knowledge they need to navigate the institution and other processes. We have examples here of financial aid and transfer, but the counseling center, the medical center, if you have one on your campus, the gender and sexuality center, the food pantry, on and on and on. All of these are sites for investigations for building institutional literacy, but also applying all of those core concepts and learning outcomes that we think of as being part of a comprehensive literacy program.
It's something that we've focused on thus far, but just to be able to really hone in on the idea of literacy as expansive and literacy instruction in terms of reading, writing, working with multilingual students is that there's a lot of possibility beyond the written word or beyond the 5 paragraph essay that we would like to be able to encourage because students may really respond well to other media or to other ways of thinking about it, and it may connect better to whatever their ultimate academic goals are. And oftentimes, you may be able to get students who will turn in quite sophisticated products when they have the opportunity to really get excited about what the final product is. And maybe that final product for them is not a traditional essay. And so, for example, we talked about the institutional literacy reflection or project, and one way that this could ultimately be expanded, again, to use contextualization, that being the college that you are at, the college that students are attending, and that scaffolded instruction, meaning that students might be starting from a place of reflection, moving to something that is more analytical and reflective, and then now to a multimodal possibility. This can be something that they develop that could be a slideshow, a web page, infographic, article, a flyer, a brochure, a graphic novel. It could be anything. But with that, the assignment is for this project, you will create a resource for your classmate that educates them on a specific institutional literacy they should become familiar with to succeed in college. And you give students the opportunity to decide what that final product may look like. Within this, this type of project invites students to acquire institutional knowledge and to share that with their classmates in a new way. It also helps students build community with each other while also sharing resources from the campus environment. Topics for this assignment, which we give 4 here, the possibilities could be endless, really, but they might be things like working on campus. How might you go about getting a job on campus or applying for work study? Understanding admissions processes for students who might be trying to get into a special career and technical education program or a nursing program or trying to transfer to a nearby 4-year institution. What does that admissions process look like, or who might they talk to in order to find out more information? If they run into issues with their studies, then how do they seek out academic support? And what are the different types of academic support that the college offers? And then also learning about the college's academic systems. As Darren mentioned before, there are so many possibilities in terms of understanding What does the registrar look like, or the financial aid office, or the counseling center? Do students know that there's a food pantry on campus, or a place where they may be able to get business wear, business clothes in case that they are looking for a job and need a suit or something like that? What does the career center look like? Again, the possibilities are really endless for this type of assignment. And students are also, through being able to present to each other and have a multimodal project, are able to work on their speech and communication skills, as well as to think beyond that 5 paragraph essay.
I love the idea of all of the possibilities, whether it's thinking about the institutional resources that our students have access to and are incorporated into our classrooms, or thinking about the ways that we can incorporate multimodality. So, for our final reflection today, we'd like you to pause the video again to either discuss in your group or to reflect on your own. And think first about in what ways campus services are already integrated into your classes. And how could these services be better utilized? Second, we invite you to consider what are the texts and writing prompts that can draw on students' lived experiences, whether for a multimodal assignment or a traditional reading and writing prompt. When you're finished with this discussion, you can unpause the video and continue on with the rest of the module. These questions wrap up our first module from the MLE Professional Development Series, but we hope that you'll join us for subsequent models. Thanks again. Today's professional development module is a part of Translating Opportunity Texas, which is a collaborative initiative among the Texas Success Center, Student Ready Strategies, WestEd, and the Center for Community College Student Engagement. The initiative is funded by Ascendium Education Philanthropy, a division of Ascendium Education Group. Copyright 2025, permission granted for unlimited use with appropriate citation.